Right, hello guys. Today is Wednesday, 28th of October 2020. And I was thinking about starting to make some videos like every Sunday the way I used to, just kind of as a journal of other things over the events, just the thoughts and things like this. But I decided to make one today as well. It's kind of weird one, but it's just lately I get like lots and lots of like info that turns up on my screen about like economics, whatever else. And obviously with the US election coming up and people talking about how it's gonna be like which each side is gonna go and start a revolution, which if the other side wins because they don't believe that it's gonna be a fair elections. As I am having my drink, you can probably appreciate that this will be a bit of a long talk. Not really scripted as usual, so I might be a bit less concise than people that script their programs. But I hope you'll bear with me. And today I want to talk about the current situation, like the general situation, well, obviously US, but the rest of the world. And I want to compare it. I mean, recently I've been read an interesting book. Well, I reread an interesting book. And I did send it to some acquaintances and friends of mine with whom we're like a bit on the different scales. So I'm a lefty, I say, hey guys, I'm a socialist, communist, name me whatever. And they say, oh yeah, we're the capitalists. And those are the people who generally are capitalists because of the opportunities which were allowed to them by a Soviet system, like a free education and other opportunities. What if the Soviet system was not perfect? We agree to that, but if you want to look at my thoughts on the Soviet system, I've got a program on my YouTube channel and on my Facebook one, so feel free. But it's a thought that has been going around with me a lot, and one of the things is usually when people say, hey, I'm a lefty, right? Everything that comes to mind is the crazy ones, right? If you're a lefty, you're the crazy one. These are the people that every time you see them on every TV channel, right? And it's kind of started, one of the thoughts that came to my mind is it like, look guys, the people who own the TV channels, right? The people who own most of the newspapers, right, are the capitalists. They are the people who do not want to really have a leftist agenda, a leftist issues coming up in the news, coming up on the newspapers, coming up to the TVs. So why is it that they are so keen to go through all the crazy left stuff? And one of the things that comes to me is like, it's not so much as people think, oh, it's like how they call those theories, the crazy theories, but it's something like, if I was a capitalist, right? If I was a hardcore capitalist, which knows that, look, there is obviously an intelligent lefty out there, I would want to discredit him. I would do the same thing which is done on the channels right now, which is I would not put up a chilled fat guy like me with a t-shirt which looks like it's got bullet holes because it's just an old one. I would put the craziest, loudest bastard on there, right? And then those are the people who, to be honest, cannot really defend their ideas in any reasonable way. You can just put somebody there who will sit, not say anything, and those people are still gonna go into a freaking spasm attack. They're gonna start screaming and proving something, and talking a whole lot of BS, which really puts many people off, right? This is why they're so keen at pushing through those people who are causing riots in US, UK, other places. Why? Because then people see like, oh, he's the lefty, it's someone like this. It's not a chilled fat guy sitting and just talking things, which quite often I would say many people, once you actually start having a conversation with them, go like, hey, it makes sense. I do remember talking to a gentleman, not a gentleman, somebody I lived with, my housemate, and we was like capitalism, 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 and I was like, I would put one case, the other case, and the other case, and he would go, oh no, this is not a proper capitalism, right? There's a proper capitalism, and this is a crony capitalism, what you're describing. And the arguments seem to strike me quite a lot, which comes from these people. It's like, oh, those are not proper capitalisms, right? You know, these guys doing crappy stuff, they're not really capitalists. They're like cronies, right? And it strikes me very much like the argument you hear from like people who, the crazies that try to talk about socialism and haven't got a freaking clue what they're talking about, and are about as connected to the normal population as I am to penguins. And to be honest, I have to admit that because I do like using Linux from time to time, and Linux's main sign for a very long time was a penguin, I probably have more related to the penguins than those crazy lefties that hit every fucking screen in the world. Okay? So you get this, and they seem to be in the screen. But what I wanted to talk about is that, what I wanted to say right now is that all their threats about them like raising like a revolution and like making the president fall away and things like this in the developed world are all BS. Because even the people who raise problems, like, you know, who burn shops and things like this, in many places, like even watching the videos, you can see it's kind of the crowd which seems to be moved, like, okay, things calmed down here in this town and the things blew up in the sub town nearby because they just picked up and moved. Okay, there's lots of people who are essentially criminals in there, right? Which is true. And this is why there's not so many of them. And they don't really have the necessary basic support from the ground up to actually start a revolution. They really don't have it. So any threats when people go like, yeah, we're gonna raise hell, it's like, no, they will not. Very same way as people on the hardcore right who say, hey, if Trump doesn't win, we're gonna have a revolution because we don't trust you. They don't have the support. They really don't. So I would like to take that left and that right completely out of the picture, right? But what I would like to say next is that, guys, the revolution with the way things are going now is inevitable. It will happen. Right? It will not happen. I mean, somebody is probably gonna ride the wave, whether it's gonna be the hardcore crazy leftists, that the way it happened in Russia in the beginning of the last century, whether it's gonna be somebody else, I don't know. But the explosion is very likely to happen. And to really put things in perspective, I want to really compare the situation we have now in many countries, the developed countries. I'm not talking the poor countries, right, where people just have nothing to lose and they kind of gave up many already, or they still slowly, like, you know, if moving somewhere. We are talking about the developed countries and that kind of differences which exist right now in the world, the kind of situation we have in the developed countries, and I want to really compare it to the situation which was in Russian Empire. Let's be honest, it was a Russian Empire before the revolution happened there, right? And like, number one, obviously we see that somebody is helping the rioters, right? Similar situation was in Russia, where people were blowing things up, and there was a case where a woman had shot a police general point blank, killed him, and when they put her into a system, they arrested her, and the judge had let her go, right? We can see similar situations, right, where somebody is, like, for whichever reasons they're doing so, they are encouraging the riots, whether it's for their political agenda, whether it's like to make the left look horrible or whichever, but it still encourages that feeling of we're not going to be punished. So the pressure goes from there. But this is like just the top of the iceberg. One thing we also see is huge discrepancies in income. And not just in income, but in the level of life as well. Back in Russia in those days, many people would end up starving, while the people who were telling everybody, look, everything is okay, there was a saying in Russian history, which is like, I don't know how to properly translate it, but под хруст французской булки, it's like tasting the French bread, something like this. While tasting the French bread, those people were trying to solve the issues, right? That's the situation we have now. We have people who are doing reasonably well, right? In the kind of, I would say, they're sitting in the top 30% and quite often in the top 10% of income, right? And you talk to them and they seem to be completely oblivious to the way people on the bottom live, right? Just give you some examples. Like I say, I have some people I know, I consider them my friends, enough to be my friends. They're slightly older than me, they are well educated, benefits of Soviet system, right? They're physicians, engineers, things like this. They live in US and they talk about how bad, horrible Soviet Union was while they work in the companies which A, paid them a pretty good wage, right? Number two, they have shares, so all the employees of those companies have shares in the company, which is one of the main principles of communism, where the employees must take part in running of the company, which is done by Ford, for example, where this is why Ford almost never, I think they ever had any unions in the Ford factories. But the reason for that was because the employees, the workers of the Ford factories, from the ground up, always took part in the running of the company. You don't have to believe me, that's the way the Ford himself set up his company from the ground up when he was just starting it, and this is written in his autobiography. Right? These are the people who work in these kind of companies where they get a good wage. I mean, they obviously deserved it, and they've been lived through a reasonably good years, right, building it all up. Right? And they have very little understanding of how the person lives when they are actually poor. I mean, I've been lucky or unlucky, say it whichever, to be on both sides, and I mentioned it before. And these people who will go like, oh, it's all capitalism, right? And they start telling about capitalism, and people believe them. They look, these guys are doing well, and there's these crazy leftists which are blowing things up, right? I mean, for me, this is the left. So if it's right on your screen, I'm sorry, but I don't know. And those are the crazy leftists which are blowing things up, which means that they are like, people will go like, okay, this makes sense, but over the time things don't change, right? So the victory of Trump bringing back the jobs to US was great, maybe not so great, but when you have in US a situation where after Trump's victory, after bringing all the jobs back to US, over 40 million people have used different food programs not to starve, you have a problem. Something is really wrong. When in UK, you see the countries I kind of know, in UK, over 4 million children live in food poverty, there is a problem. Spain, high unemployment. Portugal as well, reasonably quite high unemployment. Many other countries like this. Right? And the thing is the people who are in the top earning brackets, they have very little understanding how it is to survive on minimum wages. A very interesting note I've seen recently, where they were comparing McDonald's in Sweden to McDonald's in US. And the McDonald's in Sweden pays over $20 in wages, gives a yearly maternal leave, and gives their employees up to 1 month holiday. And this means that the burgers in McDonald's, the half pounder or something like this, costs 20 cents more. Right? In the same time, people who work in McDonald's in US, well, I'm sure they having a time of their life. And I know many people will go like, oh yeah, just get yourself a better job, just improve yourself, do some studying and get yourself a better job. Which job? Are you gonna move over for them? I mean, I've just got a job offer for a nice wage. I am not moving over. Fuck you very much. I'm not. Right? And most of the people who are making these 30% jobs, right, they don't want to move over. Like, obviously, over time, once they keel over, I mean, those who know the British, they will know what it means. But for those who don't, basically, once they pass away and free the job, then maybe. But even then, it's still only 30%. There is still 70 people on the bottom, right? So 30, 70, right? And those 70% are not really making the cut. The things which were normal in 1980s, 1990s for those 70%, not really, not anymore. And that difference kind of exaggerates itself. I've recently made a video, where I was talking the difference between a cost of, cost of somebody's worth versus actual money they have, right? Where I said, look, people need to understand the difference. that just because somebody is considered to be worth $10 billion doesn't mean they have them in the bank account. And that was like a fair point, and somebody even liked that video, but thank you very much, guys. But the problem we get is when a person working on a basic job in a company makes nearly 1,000 times less than the person which works on the top of the company, and the difference between them is only 5 levels. That's all there is. When a bank cashier makes like minimum wage in England, which is like 9 quid an hour or something like this, so let's say 20 grand, and the bank manager makes nearly 20 mil, you know, with their bonuses, the payments, the bonuses and everything like this. Not 20 mil, 2 mil. 100 times more. But they don't do 10 mil. It's like from like 5, 6, 7 mil, and those are like the money they get like tax after tax. What they make before tax, God knows. You can see the difference. Right? A friend of mine, who was a very talented person, like, you know, built her career up, but recently lost her job. Very much like myself, she's the kind of person who goes, look, you know, this is a crisis, but I don't want to be sitting at home like waiting for the weather to improve, so to say, you know, being on unemployment. So she said, look, you know, while there's no jobs in the industry, while it's hard to get jobs in the industry where she was working, she was like, look, I'm just gonna get like a normal job, just go stock shelves in Tesco's, right, for a minimum wage. Once she went for the interview, now that's her words, right, not mine, that's not just my experience, that's already somebody else's. She got really big surprise in the fact that the money she would have left after she actually received that, went for this job, versus the unemployment benefits she was having. If she got that job, she would get less money than being unemployed. While the head manager of Tesco, which is only a few levels up, and who is not there risking his life to make the fucking shop run, is getting a few million. Okay, guys, that just doesn't compare. Right, people who are on the bottom are left to survive. We see lots of big companies who got the money that were meant to support the small companies and to be paid to their employees to support their wage. Like, for example, EasyJet is one of the airlines which have fired or sent onto unpaid holiday thousands of their employees, while still paying millions of pounds to their main shareholders. Brilliant. Right, you get this situation and you see that people sooner or later start just being desperate. Right, the Russian Revolution, like, let's compare this situation to the Russia which was before that. Obviously I'm talking about now, let's look at Russia before the Russian Revolution. Tons of companies which are paying the minimum wage they can get away with. Yes, there were a few people that were doing the right thing, but overall there were tons of companies which would get people to as little as they possibly can. The difference in earnings between the people was, again, hundreds if not thousands of times, quite often, literally. right? I'll give you another example of this kind of difference. I was recently worked for a company which is a privately owned company. It's not public, but when I went into the introduction to the company, one of the people who were doing the introduction, they were so proud to tell everybody how the owners of this company have made 7 billion, not million, billion, 7 billion profit from all across the world, right? The company has a number of employees and they made 7 billion profit for just the family that owns the company. And so that everybody was very proud of this company, they told everyone that this company is gonna plant 1,000 trees this year to be green. Well done, people. Now, some of the key people who make that company kind of tick are working on the minimum wage. And I was sitting there, I was like, okay, cool. You know what, Yuri, just keep your mouth shut, don't be a smart ass. Don't ask this question. The thing was that there was another guy in there and he was German and he was like, well, how the fuck do I care about how much how much money those people have made? Am I gonna see any of it? And no, nobody would see any of it except the top managers. One of the top managers in this company didn't pay him, but they've spent over $10 million to rebuild his US house precisely the way it was in US, and to move all his stuff. So they've spent $10 million, the company, to bring him to work in Germany. I think if they took this 10 million and spread it among employees on a lower level, they would get a better fucking result. They would be way more, the employees would be way more interested in making things work. Similar situation in Russia before the revolution. People who had businesses, people who owned land in Russia, will quite often go and spend tons of money on their own entertainment, on something fancy they liked. Well, obviously at the time there were no Ferraris, but for example, if somebody wanted to go and buy themselves some jewelry, really expensive jewelry, which would be worth an equivalent of their entire staff wages for a year, right? And they would go and spend this money by that instead of helping out their people, maybe building better quality housing, doing things like this. But no, they did not do that. They did not invest in people. Surely things kind of slowly were improving, but then there were a few other financial crises. Right, I did mention today that as well, that up to 4 million children live in food poverty in UK, 40 million people in US, and 40 million people, that's like over 10% of US that having to use different variations of food banks, food parcels. Again, comparing that to Russia before the revolution. I mean, that was even worse there, but how long we can last with the food banks and food parcels in UK and US. In Russia, there were many years where people would starve, quite often to death. I mean, we're not that far from that, I guess. Or are we? I mean, I'm sorry, I'm just going to pour myself another drink. But we also have an issue of a political system. I'm sorry, guys, to say. Ooh, just give me a second. But we also have an issue with in our politics. Essentially, there has not been much change in the politicians, and how do I put it? Like, there was very little influx of new politicians who understand the modern times and can react to modern needs in many of European countries. Just recently, I was looking at the parliaments in US, UK, Europe, France, Germany, Canada. And what I found is that we have politicians which are, to be honest, very, very old. And they have again, very much like people from the top 30%, they have zero understanding of the situation on the ground. Sorry. Ooh. Sorry. Right, they have, you get these people who seem to have some thoughts, but the debates of the US, for the US presidency, I mentioned it, which seem to be like a retarded pensioner talking to a retired clown. And I do understand that Trump has actually done some good things for US economy, but overall these are the level of politics we have. Like, two 70-plus-year-old guys trying to run the economy while they have never been on the bottom floor. And I know some people will say, hey, Trump had to declare bankruptcy a number of times. Sorry, guys, he has never been poor. He has never had to survive on minimum wage. He declared bankruptcy on some of his businesses because it was a smart thing to do. And then he went on and got another few million investments so that he could continue living his lavish lifestyle. He's a good businessman. I'm not going to argue about this. He's building and whatever. He's investing. Great. But I'm sorry, guys. He's got no idea what's going on the ground. Similar situation was happening in Russia, where the so-called elites, they were very badly connected to the things which were happening to the normal people. Obviously the Tsar in Russia didn't help back then. The guy was a bit of a lunatic. But if you start comparing how elites reacted to things and how the elites react to things now, and you will see they're very, very, very similar reactions, from starting different short-term wars and just, oh look, there is a war there, just look there, don't look at the things that happen in here. Oh look, we're doing Brexit, so pay attention to Brexit, don't pay attention to us selling off lots of stuff to our mates. I mean, the situation where the bribery and things like this going on in the parliament and back in Russia, and now between many countries, you look at this and you go, wow, can it be true? I mean, the British Parliament allowing a contract for to in, to a company to do shipping between Europe and UK in case of Brexit, so they had more ships going between the countries, allowing millions of pounds to a company who haven't owned a single ship. And then the company just closed down. Nobody arrested. Right? Ministers allowing their mates tons of money, taking parts in those businesses all over the world, all over Europe as well. Not as visible, but nevertheless. While people are still remaining poor. Same thing that was happening in Russia back then. Right? People who have very little idea about the differentiation, right? They're sitting there comfortable and saying, why are people being upset? And it goes from both ways. Like, it goes from so-called elites on both sides. We're not talking just the so-called capitalists. Same goes from the so-called leftist elites. And again, same thing. Like, most of the people who became later on Bolsheviks, right? The top of the Bolsheviks, the top of the so-called left parties in Russia of those days. And if we look at the top of the leftists in modern time, again, they're the people from the top middle class and high. Most of them were not poor people. They had no idea how people lived. And in the book which I read, it was a very interesting one, the way they described it. And when you look at this and you listen to the modern leftists, and you go like, wow, the popular leftists, the modern popular leftists, right? They cannot talk about things like poverty, like they mention it, they just got no idea about it. They never mention about the fact that, for example, when people talk about the owner of Amazon being worth some, I don't know, however much money he's worth, right, I say it's BS. But don't be too lazy to talk about the owner of Amazon, right, paying as little as he can get away with, while getting paid a wage of a few $1 million. So he sets up a warehouse where people will get paid like $10 an hour, while he himself gets a few million, and if he wants an extra million, he says, I want to save some money, that's why I'm gonna fire like 1,000 people. For what? To get yourself an extra mil payment? Not really helping. And the thing is people are gonna start getting disappointed with both sides. Right now we had Trump win and saying that, but the things he brings still does not help people on the bottom. Sure, the fact that COVID came and actually gave a kick into the already flooding boat, but they had the Spanish flu, same time, similar conditions. They had the Spanish flu, we have COVID. And again, the crisis that followed gave a kick to the boat which was already leaking, with the captains who are lunatics. It's just that in Russia it was only one captain, who was the Tsar. Now we have a bunch of countries where the captains are either lunatics or complete fucking imbeciles. Trump cannot beat the poverty in US unless he starts doing things like making sure that the wages are paid properly, And again, I know that people who will tell me, yeah, but the capitalism is all about fair wages. No, it's not. Just because you guys are in the top 30% where your wage seems reasonably okay, doesn't mean that the guy on the bottom is getting the fair wage. It just doesn't. Right? People abusing their situation where the housing prices have been hiked up so high that people are forced to rent, and people who had the money who bought up the houses and now renting them out at the prices where your hair stands up. That doesn't help. And I know people say, hey, Joe Rogan has moved to a cheaper area, right? Or this guy has moved to a better area. It's great, but Joe Rogan is the top 1% of the population when it comes to the money he makes. Okay? Joe Rogan is not really the guy. There's plenty of guys who are even just in the top 30% who still cannot move out to a better place because their job is here. And they cannot drop their job because because there's not that many other places who do this job, where they can get this job. Okay, because there's like so many companies, and unless their entire company decides to move, they're still stuck in the area where the prices are super high. Talking about a poor person moving to a different city, that's really hard, especially if they don't have anything to help them out or anyone. They cannot just commute because their minimum wage does not allow them to save enough to survive for like 3-4 months while they be looking for a job. And the thing is like, okay, people go, okay, don't learn they say, okay, learn the trades. Learn the trades and you're going to make the money. Again, comparison to Russia before the revolution. People learned the trades. And then they've been put in the contracts which they couldn't leave. Just recently, I had somebody tell a story of their father. He didn't learn the trade, he was an engineer. He got sacked from his company for which he worked for 20 years. And when he tried to start another business of his own and start working with customers, that company, instead of having a chat to him and saying, hey dude, how about we make certain deals because you signed a non-compete agreement, so we have to fight with this, that company went on and bankrupted the guy. Real story. In old Russia, in Russian Empire, many people would sign up a contracts to get a job, and the conditions of leaving the company were so bad that it was nearly the same as slavery. If they wanted to leave the company, they had to pay the company so much money that with their wages they could never really achieve that. Similar situation. Right, the non-compete agreements, non-disclose agreements, like if you have done any coding, like I'm web developer, if you've done this code in our company, you can't use anywhere else. Okay, I'm gonna write another one. But many people find themselves, and people go, okay, learn the trades, go into building, go into fixing. And again, they're forgetting to tell them that, for example, a builder in UK is making just over 10 quid an hour. I don't know about US, I'm not going to talk about US. But in UK, the builder makes just on average just over 10 quid an hour. When I just moved into UK in 2000, For a few months, I worked on a building site where I was making nearly 10 quid an hour. So over the last 20 years, the people who used to have a very good wage are now nearly at the bottom of the pile. They're not in the top 30%. Like where they used to be like medium kind of level, now this medium well level is essentially a minimum, just over a minimum wage. Right? While everybody says how much they need people to come and work for them, the wages are so low that, to be honest, for many people, investing into learning the trade, investing the money into learning the trade, especially if they're already like a bit older, if they're not the young people who go to a free college, is next to an impossibility. Because number one, they working on the minimum wage, they cannot find the money to do that. And even they do get some loan to cover for the fees of the program. They cannot save up enough money to go and study a trade for 5-6 months. And after they do that, the difference in wages is so minuscule that it would take them like 50 years just to pay back the loan they had to take to get into the trade. And why is this? Well, that's because the companies, the big companies, they bring in cheap labor from poor countries, from poor areas, and get them to work for next to nothing in the building trade, in many other trades. Hence, they don't get the professionals that could grow and actually become professionals. Similar to the way they did in Russian Empire. Many companies would bring the workers, run them from some people from some countryside, pay them the minimum wage, and the people who did not have the skills to do something, but they're just cheap. Similar situation. So you have an increase in food issues, which were in Russia, right? We remember the food banks and food poverty and different food programs, right? Ever increasing in difference in wealth, right? And completely disappearing prospects for the people, which is stopped up by a government. Half of them haven't got a clue, where more than half of the people in those governments haven't got a clue what to do. And those few who do cannot fight the entire system. And even if they do something, it's too little, too late. So, and over this, with the crisis which is caused by the coronavirus, them again talking, for example, about closing down Germany, right, where they start bringing in the strict quarantine again. In US, they kind of a bit frightened of this, but again, this is probably going to start happening again. Many countries as well. When people have nothing to eat, when people can't make their way in life, and I mean, like, you know, I'm saying it to all the people who will watch this, who are in the top 30%. Guys, look, you are there, but that level can change really fast. Because people stop having the money to buy things. So how secure is your job? Right, with the government printing the money like crazy, and again, similar thing happened in Russia. It's just that in Russian Empire, what happened was that they have basically played to the hand of the capitalists from other countries and ended up causing lots of money, sending lots of money and lots of resources to other countries. Right, look at the modern situation. Tons and tons of banks are printing tons and tons of money. And that money is not really lending for the people. It's not really helping the people. It goes into a stock market. Right? And the stock market is growing rapidly, while the population seems to be growing poorer. I remember reading a book which was written just at the time of just before the revolution, where they were describing how people were getting, like, it was stories about somebody who lived at that time, and they were describing how they got pulled into one of those trading, like share trading, high frequency trading, like buying and selling shares, and they've lost like lots and lots of money. And surprise, surprise, right? At the time of a crisis, at the time when something like this is very, very dangerous, more and more people get pulled into trading. Not just like before the Russian Revolution, but also similar way the way it happened during 2008. Similar way it happened at the beginning of 2000s during the dot-com bubble crisis. Similar way people were pulled like, hey, buy a house. No matter what happens, the properties are gonna grow in price, and that bubble is still to go. Similar way people were told, hey, get a huge loan for your education. Well, those loans are about to expire in the next few years. UK is one of the first to go, because they said those loans are gonna expire by the time people are like 45. You're 45, you don't owe nothing more. How many people have defaulted on those? Similarly in US, where people have tons of student loans and they cannot pay them because the jobs which would give them enough money to do that are not there. And what we see today, say tons and tons of ads everywhere. Come on, we have this trading app where you can invest your money and make the profit. How long till this goes tits up? Right, and we see those things like high loans, and we have to ask, what happens when this stuff goes tits up, when all this goes tits up? Because tons and tons of money were dumped into a trading market, into the markets, instead of helping to set up the company which would create the market. Tons and tons of companies have got money from the government to pay the wages and then send all their employees out or fire them completely. And guys, it seems like there is so far you can take that crazy talk about the crazy leftists. They have so much potential, but they're already running out. People stop listening to them. And depending on what is going to happen next, we will see the situations which happened in US where people had riots, real riots, because they were hungry. 1929, anyone? 1930s Soviet Union, where Soviet Union has sold off tons of food while creating an artificial famine in the highest food producing regions of the country. Right? That didn't go out peacefully, despite everybody thinking that it did. Everybody who maybe remembers history, hungry riots in India, beginning of this century and during the Second World War. I mean, guys, we can learn, we can go through history, we can do the comparisons. But the situation, unless something changes really drastically, the so-called capitalism is gonna go down. I mean, it will probably change. They'll change the name and they will say, that was not the right capitalism. See, that was the capitalism is the system which meant that people who made 40 cents in the 70s are now making $4 an hour. That's the capital. $4 a day. They used to make 40 cents, now they make $4 a day. The very same people who forget to mention that the dollar has lost more than 10 times its value since then. So if anybody makes $4 a day, they essentially make less money than they did in the 1970s. The same people who say, you see, my company is giving me shares, giving us all shares, and this is a very capitalist thing to do, whereas it is the communist thing to do. They forget about this. But the very same people who forget that their jobs are, to be honest, as unsecure as anybody else's. Right? Because their company can go out of business anytime, and they just imagine to themselves that it will never happen. And well, I hope it doesn't. And they're forgetting that the guy who works in McDonald's has the same right to be able to drive a car. Instead of having to walk for 5 miles to walk every day while living in a shared room somewhere under the stairs, very much like Harry fucking Potter did. And these are things which are not getting addressed, and the fact that many people still have to rely on food banks is the same. And unless this gets fixed, I don't see how things are not gonna explode. So if the things continue going the way they are going, the revolution is inevitable. How will it happen? I'm not sure. I'm hoping it will actually be an evolution. I really am. But at the moment, more and more people have got nothing to lose. And more people are starting to notice that, hey, maybe we don't like the crazy left, but this guy, the lefty, which lives just down the road from me, seems to talk about the same issues I am. There is so many tactics by which people can be distracted. There's so many ways in which the television can beat the fridge. But we're getting to the point where the fridge is starting to beat the television. Right? That thing's already happening in Russia. That thing's just happened in Ukraine. Just recently. But in many countries, in many areas, and we're not talking just about US, we're talking about UK, we're talking about France, even France, we're talking about south of Europe. The places where the capitalism is at its most rampant, the capitalism, right? It's incorrect capitalism, right? That incorrect capitalism, as it's most rampant, we will see that the fridge starts to beat the TV. In Germany, there were already protests just recently against the closures. They say, oh, those are the people who don't believe in the corona. Maybe. Or maybe they do, but they've got nothing to lose. Right? The companies that move their jobs to poorest areas possible, while there's millions and millions of people who are underemployed, all this is going to build up, and the fridge is slowly, at a longer period of time, but it's winning. The TV, the crazy left, another war, another something else, is losing. So far they've got a bit of a corona crisis, but that's losing as well. People will ask about, hey, when is it that my fridge is gonna get full? Like when I was talking about this corona crisis as well, I made a program where I said that, well, all of a sudden we found out that the people who work in the meat factories, the people who work in the shops, they apparently matter more than my job. And they will start asking, why is it that if my job matters, if you made me a key personnel, why is it that my wage is still so low that my fridge is empty? And like I said, we can either start talking about how to improve the situation, what we can take from both systems to make things work, or we can wait for the explosion, right? And I challenge anybody who's willing to throw me anything, like any questions, anything. See if you can prove me wrong. See if you can confirm that your position is more reasonable than mine. Which I don't think so. Because if we look at things that are happening, all I will hear from you, it's not the right capitalism. Very much like people talk about, like, oh, that was not the right socialism, right? Or that was not right this, or that was not right that. Well, I don't know. I hope I'll be wrong and we will get some politicians who can make things more in order. I hope that somebody will find a way to make sure that our fridge is full and we have the jobs, and that it's not only the top 30% who can keep the fridge full. And I hope that for people doing a job, they're going to be respected for doing the job. Where they will not hear, hey, just get a better job. Where they will hear, hey mate, you got a job and you're doing the job and you're doing it well. Well done for you, mate. And your wage will allow you to have a normal life. And maybe, just maybe, we will start thinking that the CEO of the company does not deserve that 10 million. He'll be alright with 1. And the other 9, well, we just might give to the employees. just to let them know that we actually appreciate them. I mean, quite often that would be that would be not their monthly wage, but their yearly wage. I don't know, the company I mentioned before, the one I worked with, which had 7 billion, if they shared that 7 billion, that not 7 billion, but at least one of those 7 billion between the employees, I promise you, there will be about 80% in that employees in that company. 80%, right, would be getting an equivalent of their yearly wage on top of the payment. 1 billion, right? And I'm sure that the owners of the company would be quite happy surviving on 6 billion. Well, we can talk more about, I think I've just talked over an hour. I've had 1.5 glasses of this. I'm not used to talking to the camera that much anymore. And like I said, I hope you all guys have a good night. If you think that you can prove me wrong, shoot at me. Make any comments down below. If you think that things I say do make sense, put a like. If you think they don't make sense, put a dislike. I don't mind. Prove me wrong, guys. Really prove me wrong. I'll be happy to see that. If you think I'm not wrong, well, cheers to you guys. Have a good one. Take care. Bye.